Jai Baba. This is the third session in the series God Speaks as the Master Framework for Meher Baba's Darshana. And today we're going on to the second subdivision, or the second part of this series. This is slide 14. It's entitled The Divine Theme and Philosophical Foundations. And the description that I wrote up reads like this. Part 2, the divine theme in philosophical foundations. The divine theme as the central idea in Meher Baba's philosophy, or Darshana, we could say. The history of the divine theme in Meher Baba's teachings, the organization of the content of God Speaks into 3 passes. And then the last part of this, part 1 of God Speaks and the laying of the philosophical foundations. We'll do that next time. The divine theme, so now at this time, the first 2 sessions were talking about the history of the text, how God Speaks got created. But now we're starting to get into the content. This slide here, 34, is a diagram created by Rano Gailey that is probably the most iconic image associated with the divine theme, which is the journey of the soul from God's whim to know himself to self-realization. So, okay, this is we won't really be talking much textual analysis of God Speaks here, but what I do want to say is that the divine theme is right at the center of God Speaks. It's the primary content of God Speaks. The God Speaks is organized around this idea. Also, as best I can ascertain, and I've been trying to study this for 20, 30 years, the divine theme seems to be an idea that originates with Avatar Meher Baba. I haven't found it anywhere else in the history of spiritual, religious, philosophical tradition. There are hints of it, there are adumbrations of it, but the full thing seems to originate in Meher Baba's explanations. And what is more, the divine theme is not just at the center of God Speaks, but it seems to be the very, shall I say, signature philosophical idea. Now, what I mean by that, a signature idea, this is the cosmological explanation, metaphysical, spiritual explanation that Meher Baba, Avatar Meher Baba, put up front as the main idea that he wanted humanity to understand. And this begins quite early, from 1926, and continues to the end. Now, I don't mean by this that this was Meher Baba's only idea, or even necessarily that it was his most important one. I'm talking about philosophical ideas here. But it's the one that he put up front and wanted people to understand. So then, what is the divine theme? I'll put this slide, now in this particular slideshow, it is slide 81. This chart of Rano Gailey's, you can find it in God Speaks. It did not it was created after the first edition, and thus was put into the second edition of it. But what is the divine theme? It's a story. It's a narrative. In fact, very specifically, I would characterize it through the genre of biography. It is the biography of the soul itself. Like most of us, you know what a biography is. The biography of Mahatma Gandhi, or Attila the Hun, or the Gospels could be called the biography of Jesus Christ. Well, this is the biography of the soul itself. Most of us like if, you know, you were to say, what's your life story? What's your biography? You could say, well, I was, in my case, born in 1952 in America, and my parents were named so-and-so, and my brothers are so-and-so, and I went to school here, and I did this, and I got that job. Most of us would tell such a story. But think about it. If we accept Meher Baba's account of things, and I go back 300 years, I might have said, my name is Godot, and I was born in China. Or my name is Twisha, and I was born in Gujarat. I'm a woman of such and such an age. And in that lifetime, we would completely believe that. If we were to go back even longer, I'm Hermit the Frog, jumping on or I'm, the ant that's eating a crumb on your table. You see, we've been all of those things. But all that we remember is this particular lifetime, right? Except for a few people who remember past lives. Well, what Meher Baba has given us is our true biography, the biography of the soul itself that passes through one lifetime after another. And as best I know, this is the first time in religious philosophical history that this has been clearly explained to humanity. You know, some of you may have heard folk tales of the sort that there's a baby who's the child of, let's say, a king, and he gets kidnapped by a wicked minister, and they try to kill him, but he's brought up by fishermen and doesn't know who he is. And he goes through this, he's kidnapped by pirates and goes through this adventure and that adventure. You know, this kind of folktale. And then he's, say, 25 years old, and he meets this very loving older man, who's the king, who says, "Do you know who you are?" And the kid says, "Oh, I'm so-and-so." "No, that's not who you are. You are my son, and you are destined to be the king." Well, that's, in a sense, what Baba has told to all of us, that we are God. We think that we're so-and-so, but we're actually God. And this is our storyline. I'm doing all this to explain what the divine theme is about. It tells the story of where we came from, how we actually are God, and how we will know that in the end. This particular chart of Rano's, slide 81, shows this. There are many, many diagrams of Baba's on the subject of the divine theme, but in brief, you can see here, from the beyond state of God, the whim of God surged. God asked, "Who am I?" And the individual drop soul went through these kingdoms of evolution: stone, metal, vegetable, worm forms, fish, bird, animal, until the soul finally achieved the human form and got into the cycle of reincarnation, which the chart depicts here. Eventually, after millions of incarnations, the soul starts to ask, who am I? What is real? Does God exist? Why is everything changing all the time? What is permanent amid all of this? And when that question becomes intense enough, the Jivatma, the drop soul, enters into the spiritual path and starts to experience the higher spheres. All of this experience until this point was in the gross sphere, the physical, material sphere. And the cycle of reincarnation also, the soul, human beings experience the gross sphere. But when you enter into the spiritual path, then you start to experience the higher planes of consciousness, the higher spheres of existence. And in this chart here, you can see the first of these spheres is called the subtle sphere, that has 4 planes, first, second, third, fourth. When you progress through the 4th plane, you enter into the mental sphere, which is depicted right here on the chart. On the 6th plane, as the chart shows, the 3rd eye opens and you see God face to face. And this culminates in the realization of God in the I am God state. This is the story of the divine theme in brief. So to recapitulate, in the beginningless beginning comes the original question where God asks, who am I? This leads to the emergence of individual drops within the ocean. To explain this idea, God alone is real, Meher Baba said. And that's the image that he gave was like of an illimitable, infinite ocean. In such an ocean, every single drop is the same thing as the ocean. If you don't separate it, there's no difference. But with the whim of God, the drop, the individual jivatma, the individual drop soul, began to imagine its separation. Well, when God asks the question, who am I? To answer this question, the individual drop soul has to become conscious, right? You can't answer that question if you're not conscious. But there is no such thing as consciousness. So after the whim of God that it prompts creation, I'm going through the divine theme again, explaining it a little more fully. The first project that the soul has to complete is to become conscious. That's what causes this, on this chart again, this whole journey of evolution through the 7 kingdoms. What is happening is that the drop soul, the jivatma, that's a term for it. Atma is soul and jiv is kind of a living soul, a separate, individualized, ignorant living soul. The jivatma acquires consciousness step by step by progressing through the higher and higher forms of evolution. Identifying with one form, dropping it, identifying with a new one, dropping it, birth and death, birth and death. And with each new experience, this is another important part of the divine theme and very central to Meher Baba's Darshana. With each experience that you have as a drop soul, you acquire impressions. It's like photographic images would be a way of understanding this. Imprints of that experience. Baba's term for this is Sanskaras. You acquire Sanskaras. Those Sanskaras or imprints register and record what you experience, and thus they provide the mechanism by which your consciousness can accumulate. You might say they capture potential experience. And you acquire more and more and more and more and more and more and more sanskaras as your consciousness grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. This is very long. We're talking about millions of incarnations. In fact, Meher Baba says, a note in God Speaks says that you pass through 50 crore births and deaths. A crore is 10 million, so that'd be 500 million births and deaths in the course of the entire journey. It's very, very long. When you reach human form, this stage in the divine theme on the chart, you can see reincarnation with these twists in the chart here are sanskaras winding up and accumulating. When you reach human form, evolution is complete. That is to say, the jivatma is wide awake. It is fully conscious. No more consciousness is needed, actually. The problem is that your sanskaras now focus your consciousness on the past, on the content of your sanskaras. If you were a monkey in your last lifetime, in your new lifetime, instead of reading God Speaks to find out about their spiritual journey, you'll probably be more interested in bananas or coconuts or having fights with other monkeys, because that's who you just were. You have all these sanskaras, and the soul has no idea why it undertook this journey in the first place, even though that original question, who am I, is what is driving the whole thing. It is actually what's driving all of us, but we keep misidentifying what we want. Instead of saying, I want God, we think I want a banana, or, I want sex, or I want fame, or these various objects of desire. They're the whim falsely directed towards non-authentic goals because of Sanskaras. After millions of lifetimes in reincarnation, you get sick of it and start to ask what is real. Then you get into this stage, as shown on the chart, of involution, where the soul finds methods of getting rid of sanskaras without acquiring new ones. You see, sanskaras or impressions are central to this whole story of the divine theme. And there are various ways of doing this. All the great religions and mystical traditions provide routes by which you can do this, even though this metaphysical understanding may not have been articulated there. But you spend sanskaras without getting new ones, you become freer and freer of them, and thus you progresses on this chart from the first to the second to the third to the fourth plane, till you enter into the mental sphere, and then you, in the sixth plane, see God face to face. When all of your sanskaras are gone, then the soul automatically knows itself. This actually has to be accomplished by the grace of a perfect one, but then you have the I am God experience. So the original question, who am I, is answered by the final answer, I am God. That is the story of the divine theme in brief. Now, a little bit of an account of how this narrative emerged in the course of Meher Baba's lifetime. Here we are, slide 31. I want to read this for a second. This is from Baba's talks to the Meher Ashram boys, the book that will soon be published as Creation and Its Causes. Here he's explaining how it is that a perfect one selects a keynote theme suited to the purposes of his mission and the understanding of humanity at a given time. He uses the term Sadguru because he hadn't yet said that he was the avatar, but I think we could take this to mean avatar. So here it reads, now, why have all the Sadgurus and prophets given different religions? Good question, right? I mean, Islam doesn't say this. Christianity doesn't say this. The Bhagavad Gita is focused on different sorts of things. Buddhism doesn't even acknowledge the existence of God. Why do they contradict each other? Baba goes on, why do they lay down different rules and regulations if their common aim was only to direct the minds of the people towards God? Why different rules for the solution of one common problem? Let us discuss this. Baba's talking to a bunch of boys here. This is up on Marabad Hill, right in front of what's now the Samadhi. Suppose that Shri, that's the name that was given, Baba was referred to as Shri in those days, a Sadguru, descends to the world plane to turn from worldliness those who have little or perhaps no connection with him from the past, such as members of his own circle do. In other words, an avatar needs to address all of humanity, not just the people in his own intimate association. He's got to provide for them too. So what does he say? Now, setting aside the matter of his own circle members, who is a matter of course he will make God realized as he himself is, how is he to turn the faces of the masses and millions of the world in the direction of God and the spiritual path? And exactly when will he do this? To bring this to accomplishment, Shri will begin, Shri is Baba, of course, right? Shri will begin by marking the certain points and factors in the environment, namely the time, place, mentality of the people, their inclinations and bent of mind, and so forth. And after making careful note of these conditions, he will think of some easiest and best way. and will decide upon a particular doctrine. Get this idea? I'm thinking that Baba did this with a divine theme. That was his particular doctrine, seems to me. He will decide upon a particular doctrine, some keynote with which to guide the people. And he will anyway, I've missed some content here. As we will have said, every prophet has done this. Okay, a doctrine at a particular time before a particular mass of people requires beforehand a close study and observation of the time, place, circumstances, and mentality of the masses, and so forth, as we have said. Every prophet has done this, and each has highlighted his own particular doctrine as he deemed best in view of the time, people, and circumstances. And then he talks about Muhammad did this, Buddha did this, Jesus did this. So this would explain why they gave different teachings. But in this age of Meher Baba, we have a convergence of all the populations of the world, all the civilizations of the world, all the religious teachings from the past. We've also had the emergence of modern material science, which gave us the idea of evolution, which Baba has also brought into the compass of the divine theme. So it seems to me that this understanding is what humanity needs and what can really draw together the diverse currents of the world at the present time. That's, to my understanding, why Meher Baba picked the divine theme as his central focus, and why it has not been explained before. The time was not yet ripe for humanity to understand this. Now, so that's Baba talking to the Meher Ashram boys about how a perfect master and avatar works. Baba first, this is slide 34, the first time Baba really explained this, as best I can see, was 1926, when he dictated Infinite Intelligence. I've given whole weekend presentations on the divine theme through the course of these different works, and it's a very interesting subject to explore in itself, but this is going to be a very brief form of it. But in this chart from God Speaks, for example, this is a master chart, actually. Actually, I'll show this one first. This is 46. It's if you expand it a little bit, you can see this H here is the unconscious state of God from which it begins, and then you progress through stone, vegetable, animals, and up to human beings, then through advanced souls to the perfect one on top. These are the 5 major steps in the divine theme. In fact, let me show you these 5 steps, slide 101 in the divine theme. The 5 steps in the storyline: creation, originating in the whim of God to know himself; the evolution of consciousness through the 7 kingdoms of evolution; 3, reincarnation in human form, 84 lakhs of rebirths. Baba says a lakh is 100,000. So he said that in human form you go through 84 lakhs, 8,400,000 births, just in the reincarnation process. Then 4, involution through the planes of the subtle and mental spheres. And 5, the realization of God. That's the story of the divine theme. So here is another chart from Infinite Intelligence. This is number 47. Again, we would have to spend time to really study these. I'm giving you just an idea here. But here on this trajectory, you can see at the top, this is the beyond state of God. Then you have stone, vegetable, animal, and human beings. And then these 2 points and lines are experience of the planes, and finally experience of the I am God state. So this slide, this master slide in Infinite Intelligence, is again an account of the divine theme. In jumping ahead a little bit, in 1934, Baba wanted to make a movie, a film, a Hollywood film, and he went to Hollywood to try to get this done. And the title was going to be How It All Happened. And even though the film was never made, our archives here at the Trust has the materials that Baba prepared. And the subject of it was indeed the divine theme. Baba wasn't using that expression yet. That term, divine theme, didn't come up until the 1940s. But that's what it in fact was. In this particular chart on slide 51, you can, in fact, I'll go back to the previous one, slide 50. You can see the descending track means the evolution of form and consciousness. The transverse track means reincarnation, and the ascending track means involution of consciousness back to God. And Baba created this master chart. You could see here on slide 52. This chart is very big. It's 5-6 feet tall, actually. It's in the Trust archives. And this is the portion of it corresponding to what we just described. This on the left is the evolution of form and consciousness from God in its original unconscious state through the kingdoms of evolution to human form. This transverse track from left to right is reincarnation in human form, and this ascending track is the involution of consciousness through the planes of consciousness. Now, Baba started to use, there's much more to say about it. It's quite fascinating. So in another presentation, we could go into it more. But in the 1940s, Baba started to use the term divine theme. You can see here on slide 68, there is a discourse where he presents it. There are 8 discourses on meditation in Baba's collection called the Discourses. The 4th of them is entitled Assimilation of Divine Truths, as you can see here. But then if we move ahead, slide 70, Baba gives a reading meditation in this discourse. And the title of it is The Divine Truths for Meditation Through Reading. Baba gives a whole meditation process. This is for humanity for the next 700 years, where you read this over and over again, and Baba has a 3-step process by which you read it. And what the content of this, I'll just scroll through these pages here, slides 71, 72, 73, 74. What this content is a description of the divine theme or the journey of the soul. So what Baba gave as a meditation was, in fact, the divine theme. This is perhaps the best short write-up of the divine theme anywhere. It's a beautiful piece of writing. So Baba first gave this discourse in 1941. In 1943, I'll show you here's the cover of this book. It's slide 3. This is a republication of it a few years ago by the publisher Meher Manwani. But Baba published a book, and before that, he had a gathering, a Sahavas gathering at Mehrabad. 1943 was the middle of World War II, so it was very difficult to organize these things. But Baba had a 4-day gathering with 120, 125 of his followers, and the focus of it was precisely this topic, the divine theme, which he called by that. Baba explained it to them, and then the culmination of it was a group meditation on this chart, which you can see in slide 5, which is a chart representation of the divine theme. The whole large group meditated on this chart. I don't know of another time in Meher Baba's lifetime where he did this with a larger group like this. He may have done it with his mandali on rare occasions, but here he had a Sahavas specifically focused on a meditation. And what was it about? The divine theme. In this chart, in slide 5, you can see on the left here the different kingdoms of evolution, the evolution of consciousness: stone, metal, vegetable, worm, fish, bird, animal, and here in the center is human form, reincarnation in human form. Now you have full consciousness, which this chart actually explains. If we spent time, I could show more fully how this is. Now, coming down the right, you have subtle and mental conscious atmas, as they are aware of the subtle and mental spheres. In this chart, by the way, here's the gross world, here's the subtle world, and here's the mental world, which the souls are conscious of. Until, on the right here, Z, you have souls who are inwardly conscious of the God state. This is God realization. And among these, there are a few of them, Baba calls it master souls, who are conscious of all of it, not just of God, but of the different lower states as well. Right? So you get this idea. This chart is explaining the journey of the soul, the divine theme. So we've gotten up through 1943. Now, Baba really didn't talk much more about this in the 1940s, and then the New Life intervened. But in 1955, Baba published God Speaks, and this is the master exposition of the divine theme. I'm going to come back to it in a second, but let me just finish the story by saying, in 1959, Baba's disciple, Francis Brabazon, published a book called Stay with God, which Baba said gives life to God Speaks. And the part of Stay with God that does this most is this. We're slide 83, book 3, God's Speaking, right? You can see God Speaks in that. Francis was given this order by Baba in 1955 at the very gathering where God Speaks first became available. And what this third section, there are 5 sections to Stay with God, what this third section does is give a poetic rehearsal of the divine theme. It's very beautiful. You can see I'm just scrolling through the poetry here. And he tells the story of the divine theme in poetic terms. Most beautiful account of it. In 1962, Baba held what is known as the East-West Gathering. And in the course of it, Baba gave a lecture, actually, on not the divine theme, but in fact on what's called the 4 journeys. I'm just mentioning this as a capper to the divine theme. The idea of the 4 journeys can be found in God Speaks, actually, but this carries the story of the divine theme through to the end. The divine theme takes us from the whim of God to the realization of God, but what the 4 journeys explains is souls who go beyond that. The first journey is from human form to the realization of God. The second is from the realization of God to the return to creation consciousness. Most God-realized people never do this. A few do. The third journey is from creation consciousness to the perfect master state, to the state of a Sadguru or Kutub. And the 4th journey is when the perfect master dies and returns to immersion in God beyond. So in slide 86, you can see a depiction, 106, a depiction of the 4 journeys, which you will find this chart here it is in God Speaks, slide 107, chart 6 in the 2nd edition of God Speaks. So this has taken us through to the publication of God Speaks. And this is how God Speaks uses the divine theme. So now I'd like to look at how God speaks develops the divine theme. And there is no doubt that God speaks is the master treatment of this subject. All these others are most valuable and most interesting, but God speaks develops it on a grand scale. So in terms of its content, we could say once again, God Speaks is the master biography of the soul. It's the story of you and me, mate, right? It's actually not about the avatar. The avatar doesn't do this. It's every other jivatma that does this. So in this slide 80, I want to explain how God Speaks uses the divine theme here. You see here 8 parts, right? Parts 1 through 10. Part means chapter, so there are 10 chapters. And then after the 10th one, then there's a supplement, an epilogue, and glossary, and index. We're going to skip that today. Part 1 will be the topic of our next session next week. And it's the divine theme is not coming into the picture yet in part 1. Part 10 is very short. It's a page, and I would characterize it through the rhetorical term palinode or retraction. We'll talk about that in due course. Where the divine theme comes in is parts 2 through parts 8. And now this is very important. This is my own understanding, but it seems to me this is obviously true. God Speaks goes through the storyline of the divine theme 3 times. 3 times specifically. So a lot of times people will say, well, God Speaks keeps repeating itself. Well, yeah, it does. It's repeating in this way. I'm not talking stylistically. I'm talking in terms of content. It is tracing its way through this storyline 3 times in 3 completely different ways. And I think if you understand that, this more than anything else I could say in this whole series will be helpful to readers about this. So the first, I call them the 3 passes, so to expand this. The first pass through the divine theme is here from part 2 to part 7, chapters 2 through 7. Now, that may look to you like it's most of the book, but if you look at the page numbers, part 2 starts on page 8, and part 7 ends on page 74. So it's only about a third of the book, actually. And this is the first pass through the divine theme. Part 8 here, Baba starts over and does it all over again a second time. This chapter is called The Beyond State of God, the First Urge, and the Cycle of Evolution and Involution of Consciousness. Right? If you look at that title closely, you can see that's the divine theme. This begins on page 75 and runs to page 158. Right? So this is very long. It's actually longer than those previous 6 chapters are. And then the third pass is chapter 9, part 9, called The 10 States of God. And as I was explaining last time, this is actually where Baba started. He dictated this to Dr. Ghani in 1947-48. Baba began with this, and it's the second chapter in Dr. Ghani's unpublished manuscript. But in God Speaks, it emerges as the penultimate, second to last chapter, followed by just a very short 1-page conclusion. So these are the 3 passes, and this is a brief description of what each pass does. They do completely different things. The first chapter, in part 2, you get the initial urge and the journey of evolving consciousness. This is the first 2 parts of the divine theme story, creation and evolution. Part 3, characteristics of the different kingdoms. This is just a very brief synopsis of evolution. So it's repeating the evolutionary part, right? Remember, evolution is the second step. creation, evolution, reincarnation, involution, God realization. The second step is evolution. Part 4, reincarnation and the impressionless equipoise consciousness. This is the third stage in this narrative, the reincarnation stage. Now, parts 5 through 7 complicate this pattern a little bit because they go through involution 3 times in completely different ways. So we'll come to that in due course. But part 5, the planes, is basically the straight, ordinary, conventional treatment of the divine theme. It's like the preceding chapters have been. Then part 6 and 7, chapters 6 and 7, review the same topic of the planes from a very different point of view. And I won't even try to explain it now. It's bringing up a completely different perspective of the involutionary journey. So you get 3 little epicycles of going through the divine theme 3 times. Through the course of this, from parts 2 to part 7, you get the first pass through the divine theme. Now, let me give an analogy for this from cinematography. If you're making a movie, what this section, much of it, does would be, let's suppose I'm doing a day in the life of Naman, who's our photographer here. And so you have a cameraman who, sees him sleeping, looks from above. They're knocking at the door opens. You see Naman getting up, brushing his teeth, eating breakfast, whatever it may be. The distance is kind of like you might see things that Naman himself does not see, but you're always within a short, fairly close distance where you can see the life of this Jivatma, right? Maybe a close-up of his face, maybe a long shot from time to time. But it's all shown relative to the life experience of our Jivatma here. The first part is kind of like that. It talks about things that the Jivatma wouldn't understand. If you're talking about the accumulation of Sanskaras in worm form, well, the worm is not going to understand it. The idea of Sanskaras, but it is relatable to a worm form. It's kind of like you're following the career of the Jivatma. The whole first pass is kind of like that. It's looking at the divine theme from the standpoint of the life of the Jivatma itself, understanding it in that perspective. The second pass, which is right here in part 8, the beyond, etc., very long, is a completely different perspective. Now it's looking at it from the standpoint of cosmic principles of cosmic architecture. And I have in a different slideshow, but I won't pull it up here. Some of you may have seen some Chinese landscape paintings. Have you ever seen them? And sometimes you'll have a vast landscape with hills and mountains and mist and lakes and rivers. And down in one little teensy-weensy corner, you see a person. But somehow these paintings are constructed so that your eye goes right there. Well, that's what the second pass is like. It's not focusing on the small experience of the Jivatma, but is looking at it in the context of vast eternal principles of cosmic architecture. And these are some of the principles that Baba brings up now. So you see, the focus is bigger. It's a much bigger setting. Baba begins by talking about the everything and the nothing, a huge metaphysical theme in Baba's Darshana, as a matter of fact. Baba goes on to talk about knowledge, power, and bliss. And these are the basis for the mental, subtle, and gross sphere, and how it's this triune nature of God that drives the journey of the soul through the divine theme. Then Baba starts getting into 2 related topics, the 3 states of the three states, sound sleep, wakefulness, and sound sleep, dream, and wakefulness. These are not just psychological states, but cosmic principles. And he shows how that is relevant to the journey of the soul. Baba also gets, what I'm describing here are going to be big topics that we're going to deal with in later sessions of cosmic architecture. That's the term that I use to talk about this. Baba also talks about God's three aspects as creator, preserver, and destroyer, and how that is the basis for our experience. In Infinite Intelligence, much earlier, Baba called this Ishwar, the divinity. Dattatreya would be another Hindu form of this. Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahesh. So Baba talks about that. In the latter sections of this chapter, Baba, going into the spiritual path, brings in the Sufi experiences of fana and baka, annihilation and abiding in. We'll be talking about that in due course. In the last sections of it, Baba starts to talk about the spiritual hierarchy, the 7,000 offices on the spiritual planes occupied by advanced souls, the 56 God-realized souls who are eternally present, the 5 perfect masters, and he concludes with the avatar. There's a very important treatment of the avatar at the end of this. So you can see that all of this, he's going through the divine theme once again, but he's presenting it in terms of great themes of spirituality that go way beyond just the divine theme, as a matter of fact. That's the second pass. And now we come to the third pass. That's this 9th chapter, part 9, the 10 states of God. And here, let me show you that the chart that's concerned. Here's slide 82, shows you the 10 states of God. Now, I think this is, just intellectually speaking, a brilliant stroke on Baba's part. What we've dealt with so far has been a narrative. If you want to interest people, the best way to do it is to tell them a story. What does a mother do with kids? Here, let me tell you a story. Baba's told us a story. Whose story? Our story. A story of the soul. But now Baba is presenting this from a truer perspective. This story is actually a manifestation of eternal states of God. In other words, Baba has taken the story out of time. This is timeless, actually, and these states are always there. So in this slide 82, these are the 10 states of God, and you can follow the story of the divine theme by tracing through their progression. 1 is God in the beyond state. 2 is the 3 beyond states of God. We'll talk about this in due course. The 3rd state of God as emanator, sustainer, dissolver, creator, preserver, destroyer, Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. Now, in the 4th state of God, God as the embodied soul, the journey of the Jivatma starts. And you see here on the lower right, in the 5th state of God, the different kingdoms of evolution, from stone through animal to human. At the very bottom here, we human beings, the divine theme bottoms out with us. We're at the state of greatest distance from God, actually. Here in the 6th state of God, you have human beings in reincarnation. Now, in the 7th state of God, you have the involution of consciousness, from gross to subtle to mental consciousness. Here in the 8th state of God, you have God realization, where the original question finds its answer. Who am I is answered by the great final resolution of the divine theme. I am God. Aham Brahmasmi is what is said in the Upanishads, or Anal Haq is what the great martyr Mansur al-Halaj said. I am the supreme, I am the truth. And that here the divine theme is concluded. The 9th and 10th states of God in this chart bring in the 4 journeys, which I mentioned earlier. So again, the first pass in chapters 1 through 7 is a kind of more basic literal account of the soul's journey. The second pass in the long chapter 8 is the same journey told in the context of vast eternal principles. And the third lifts it out of time to show all of this as a manifestation of eternally abiding states of God that are always there. That, in brief, then, is an account of the divine theme as it is explained in God Speaks. So in our next section, we're going to start actually dealing with the text of God Speaks itself, with part 1, chapter 1, which gives foundational concepts to the rest of the book. So that's all for today. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.